Jessica. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar. I'm glad to see that the poll results indicate that everyone is interested in doing some writing for the property professional. So hopefully you'll find this presentation to be helpful. I think one of the really nice things about the property professional is that we always have a variety of authors and a variety of topics, and that just really adds to the content of the magazine, because we're kind of getting stories and knowledge and experiences that that kind of run the gamut, because we're all involved with different types of organizations, and we all face some of the same asset management challenges, but some very different asset management challenges. So it's provided a really good platform and a really effective platform for knowledge sharing and getting information out there, and just really staying in touch with NPMA members that may be in, spread out geographically across the country. It kind of gives us all kind of touch points with each other when we're able to use that as a knowledge sharing platform. So we will get into the presentation, and there'll be, I believe, some time for questions and answers afterwards, and Jessica's going to be moderating when folks raise their hand and have questions. I do, please ask questions as they come up. I've tried to include what I think is some helpful information to help jumpstart some folks who might want to write for the property professional and just aren't really sure how. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it. So I think that at the outset, some people think that writing an article is just a very daunting task, and they think, well, where do I start? I've never done this, and it becomes an overwhelming task that is too overwhelming to tackle, so it kind of is pushed to the side. So what I hope to do in the next hour or so here is really just break it down into steps, into very manageable steps, right? So if someone's goal is to run a marathon, nobody steps out the door on day one and runs 26.2 miles, right? We have to break it down over the course of a period of time into manageable steps, and we start with a mile, and then we up it to 2 and 3 and so forth. So writing an article is no different, right? Nobody expects you to sit down and in an article and in an hour have a beautiful piece of prose. So we're kind of going to just go through some helpful steps that can provide a roadmap for writing an article. Okay, so why don't people write articles? I have here a few reasons here that people cite that I've heard quite a bit, that I'm sure I've even said, and maybe you said. I'd love to write an article, but I've never been much of a writer. Or, what would I write about? I'm not really a subject matter expert in anything. Writing an article would take a lot of time. I already have too much on my plate. Or, I can't think of an interesting topic that hasn't already been discussed in an article. So this is not an exhaustive list of reasons why people don't think they can write an article, but they're things that I've heard and things that I've admittedly even thought in the past. So why should you write? So in answer to, I'd love to write an article, but I've never been much of a writer. Well, several first-time authors for the property professional, we have a lot of first-time authors who've never written an article right for the magazine, and many of them have been recognized in recent years with literary awards. So we're talking about people who've never really put pen to paper and had a published article, and they're receiving recognition throughout the NPMA for writing such good articles that we're recognizing them with literary awards. So just because you've never written an article doesn't mean that you can't write a good article, and in fact, one that will be recognized for being exceptional. What would I write about? I'm not a subject matter expert in anything. So you are a subject matter expert in your own experiences, right? So a lot of, these articles don't have to be, exhaustively researched in facts and have, hundreds of citations, and you don't have had to go to school to get degrees to write an article. You can write about your own personal experiences. You can write about things that you witness during the course of your professional day. So you are a subject matter expert in those areas, and many of the kind of most effective articles that we see are articles around people's real life experiences that they share with us. Writing an article would take a lot of time. I already have too much on my plate. Understandably, we're all very busy people, and this is kind of sometimes seen as just another task. So if you kind of look at it from a different perspective, though, instead of just being another to-do on your to-do list, writing can be fun once you get started. So if you can kind of get to the point where you can select a topic that interests you, that you want to educate yourself about and educate others about, it won't seem just like another task. The other thing is that articles don't have to be novels, right? We don't need to have a 5-page article to be published in the Property Professional. You'll notice that even in the more recent publications, we started to include things called mini articles, and a lot of times these can pack a lot more punch because people don't necessarily want to sit down and read a 4 or 5-page article. They want to read a few paragraphs maybe that has some good information in it. So it doesn't have to be an exhaustive research piece about something. It can be as short or as long as you want to make it. I don't think I have anything interesting to write that hasn't already been written. So your topic does not need to be a new topic. We see a lot of articles that are kind of around recurring topics, recurring trends in the industry. Just because someone wrote on the topic previously doesn't mean that you can't write about it again from a different perspective, or looking at something from a different angle. So just because someone wrote about reutilization at your organization doesn't mean that you can't do the same thing. So one thing that might be helpful is to take a look at what others are writing about, right? If you're looking for some sort of inspiration or wondering how you can get started to write an article, take a look at what's already been written for our publication. So there are just a couple of, 5 or so examples of different articles that have been written that kind of highlight the breadth of topics that we get with the Property Professional. So we have one called Processes in the World of Government Contract Property by Doug Guest. So this is a type of article heavily researched. There were a lot of citations, really very informative piece. We have something called Providing Value Through Improved Inventory Processes by Steve Fisher, which was in a cartoon format. So drastically different style, different tone, different way to present information, but a very effective and good article. We have A Day in the Life of a Property Professional at the Shooting Range. So in this, Carolyn Michelmy wrote about her experience going with her customer to a shooting range, right? Movement of Government Equipment Island Style is where the author was talking about a unique geographical situation in asset management. And should live animals be tracked as personal property assets? This is a very kind of an unconventional type of asset. We don't typically think about live animals as things that we track on a day-to-day basis. So this is just kind of a little highlight of the different kinds of articles that there are. And in looking through some of the past issues of the Property Professional, which you can find on the NPMA website, it might give you a little bit of inspiration or some ideas about types of things that other people are writing about, and it may make the whole writing your own article a little bit more of an approachable endeavor. So I find that, like anything, any task that we're going to undertake, having a roadmap and knowing kind of the steps that you need to get to along the way to get to your ultimate goal is helpful. So we're going to kind of go into these steps in a little bit more detail, but I broke it down into what I think are kind of the most important steps to writing an article. So defining your objective, formulating a thesis. What's your point, right? We want these articles to have a point or to put forth some sort of perspective. Organizing your supporting points. Step 4, which is probably the hardest, is just conquering the blank page, right? Just putting pen to paper, or in this day and age, booting up your laptop and typing your first character. Luring the reader, how to kind of grab your reader's attention, and then how to keep your reader's attention throughout the piece. Concluding your work and giving it a title. So they're all of these steps kind of, I think, carry equal weight. So we're kind of going to just talk about each one and kind of some tricks that you can use and some tips that you can use to kind of moving along the process. So determining your objective. So the first thing that you want to determine is, why are you writing this article? Am I writing it because someone told me that I had to? Am I writing it because I want to get some, earn some credits towards my certification renewal? Or am I writing it because I really am interested in something and I want to share information? So I think it's important to understand what your objective is, so you know kind of what approach to take to your audience. So are you looking to entertain? Are you looking for this to be kind of thought-provoking? Why are you doing this? So regardless of the reason, I think it's important to perform this step so that you can determine the tone in which you're going to write the article. You then want to consider your audience. So if you're writing for the property professional, this is going to be kind of a known audience, right? Members of NPMA who are all in some way affiliated with the asset management world. But it is appropriate to know the types of readers that are going to be reading your article, so that you know kind of what to assume and what not to assume. So I think that you can assume, if you're writing for the property professional, that folks that are reading it are members of NPMA and have some background and knowledge in asset management. Now, that knowledge is going to vary greatly, but you don't have to kind of introduce this article by defining terms and, speaking to an audience that has no background in what you're talking about. And then why should the reader pay attention to what you have to say? When you're writing an article, you need to be very confident in your authority, right? No one wants to listen to a presentation or read an article that's being given by someone who is kind of being wishy-washy and using a bunch of kind of qualifiers like I think or it seems or, be assertive in your statements. If you're assertive in your statements, your reader is going to believe that you know what you're talking about, and your reader is going to be much more invested and much more willing to read what you have to write. So I think one of the most important things about writing an article is formulating your thesis. That's not to say that articles with no thesis or a weak thesis can't be enjoyable to read, but I think that the most effective articles are ones that put forth a strong point that is very clear and easy to understand, and then that then discusses that point of view or supports that point of view. So we have an example here. Let's hypothetically say that your article is about RFID solutions. I have an example here of what is a stronger thesis and what is a weaker thesis. So a strong thesis might be, don't be lured by the most expensive and shiny RFID solution. Let's explore how to easily navigate your way through the maze of RFID solutions to determine which could best solve your property management challenges. Okay, so from that thesis statement, I know immediately that this article is going to help me navigate the maze of RFID solutions and maybe give me some information about what might be right for my needs. A weaker thesis, which still kind of gets the same point across, is many types of RFID exist for the management of personal property, ranging from very expensive to quite inexpensive. That's true. It's not the most terribly interesting sentence that I've ever read, and I'm not so sure that it makes me want to read on as much as the first one. So formulating your thesis and phrasing it in a way that gets to a very concise point very quickly is important for the rest of your article, because this is kind of what it's all going to be focused around and where you're going to draw all of your supporting points from. So once you have your thesis, you then need to support that thesis. And there are a number of ways to do this, and they can come from a variety of sources. And that's why I think that, we have such interesting kinds of articles in the property professional, is because we don't necessarily just have one. So we don't necessarily just have articles that are supported in research and facts. We have a lot of those, and they're very useful and helpful. But we have some articles that are supported through personal experiences, through real-life scenarios that provide some sort of lesson learned. So, maybe you professionally went through an experience that you'd like to share because you'd like to share the lessons that you learned from it. Or maybe you went through an experience that was very successful and you want to share some of those reasons for success in your article. So the supporting points don't necessarily mean that you need to, spend hours on the internet and in the library researching. That's certainly beneficial and effective for one type of article, but doesn't need to be the way that all articles are supported. So once you have your thesis and once you kind of have a general idea of how you want to support that or the ideas that you want to propose, you're ready to start writing. And this is when you're going to try to figure out how you want to say what you're going to say. So sometimes this is the most overwhelming part. So we're going to kind of try to break this down into steps so that when your pen hits the paper, it's not too overwhelming and you can actually make some progress that you then have to build upon, and the task becomes much more manageable. So what have you been reading? This is kind of the first thing that I like to think about. What have you been reading that you enjoy reading? Chances are if you enjoy reading something, other people do too. So do you enjoy reading novels or journals that are very heavily research focused, studies, magazine articles, comic strips? What types of things interest you? If you write in a style that is something that interests you, I think you're going to be much more successful at actually completing an article because you'll find the process of writing it interesting. And think about, the reasons that you enjoy these things. Do you enjoy reading things that are more concise and short? Do you enjoy things that have a little bit more humor and a little bit more levity? Do you enjoy these things because they're very well organized or easy to read? So kind of looking at what you enjoy reading and why might help you to formulate how you're going to plan for your article writing. And what's very important to note is that no two people have the same writing style, and that's a good thing. That's what affords us the variety that we have in our magazine. No two articles are going to be the same. No two approaches are going to be the same, and the writer's tone is going to vary greatly, and that I think is a good thing. Okay? So this is a blank page. This is what we're all looking at when we start writing. I don't want it to be that scary, so we're going to take a look at how we can start very easily and build upon our building blocks to actually make this into an article. So we're going to talk about how we can conquer the blank page. So the first step is, now that you kind of have your thesis, you have your supporting points, you know what you want to say, draft a rough outline. This does not have to be any sort of elaborate outline with bullets and sub-bullets, right? You don't have to have this be, several pages long. Just a rough outline of, here's my thesis, here are the supporting points, here's the order in which I want to present them. Once you kind of have your rough outline, you have a shell of the article that really just needs to then be filled in with sentences used to support your thesis. So after you have your outline, you're going to want to think about your introductory paragraph. I think that the introductory paragraph is the most important part of any article. The introductory paragraph is where you are either going to you're going to get the attention of your reader, or you're going to totally lose your reader. I know that when I pick up something to read, whether it be a magazine or a newspaper, I look at the first paragraph, and if it's not interesting to me, I probably don't read on, right? We all kind of, go into the bookstore, maybe not go into the bookstore as much now with, Kindles and e-readers, but, you read the synopsis of a book before you decide whether you want to invest the time and money in reading the whole book. So your introductory paragraph is quite important, and it needs to do a few things. So you want to lure the reader. You want to do something that attracts the reader to your article so that they continue reading. You want to present your thesis somewhere in that introductory paragraph. It doesn't have to be the first sentence, but it should be in there somewhere. You also want to set your tone. So is your article going to be very factually based? Is it going to be more whimsical, right? Is it going to be a comic strip? Is it going to be interview-based? Is it going to be question-answer? So you want to set your tone in the introductory paragraph and carry that tone throughout the article. Articles are sometimes a little bit tough to follow if the tone changes throughout. So if at one point the author is being very whimsical and a little bit humorous, and then the article gets very serious, that tends to confuse the reader a little bit. So set your tone and kind of follow that throughout the entire article. And your introductory paragraph should also prepare the reader to some point for what the reader can expect in the following paragraphs. It doesn't have to be a complete summary of your article, and it shouldn't be, right? You just want to prepare them for what's to come to make them want to read on. So if you think about your introductory paragraph as like a movie trailer, right? When we see movie trailers, they show us the best parts of the movie to make us want to go see the movie. They don't show us the 10 minutes in the middle of the movie that are boring and have no dialogue where nothing happens. They show us the clips of the movie that make us think the movie is going to be the best thing we've ever seen. So the introductory paragraph in your opening sentence specifically, think of it as your movie trailer. Think of it as the couple words that you get to show to the reader to say, I want you to read my whole article. This is going to be some of the best material that I have. So in the opening sentence, if we're talking about our RFID solutions, opening sentence number 1, do you want a Ford sedan? It's reliable, it's affordable, and offers everything you need. But you can also afford a Ferrari. No-brainer, right? So this is interesting. I'm wondering why is this question being asked? I want to read on and know what this article is more about. Here's another opening sentence. You should thoroughly research all types of RFID solutions before choosing the one that is best to suit your specific needs. Again, that might be true, and that's a good point to make, but it's not necessarily the kind of sentence that really makes me want to read on to the next sentence. So try to make that opening sentence something that is going to grab your reader's attention. Another really good way to do this is to relate to the reader. So readers are much more willing and much more likely to continue reading something if they can relate to it in some way, if they think that in some way this piece is going to be able to relate to their lives. So for example, number 1, have you ever purchased something because it was advertised as the best, only to realize that something much more affordable would have done the trick? If I were reading that, I would say, well, yes, of course I have. Everybody's done that. Let me read on and see what this article wants to tell me. Another good example is we've probably all enjoyed the convenience of delivery apps at one time or another, but beware. One touch can translate into hidden charges and your money disappearing like magic. So this is an actual introductory sentence from an article that had to do with delivery apps and where hidden charges may be hidden in what you're getting delivered, and they may not be very visible. So this is an article that I read that I said, well, yes, I do use delivery apps. Are there places where I'm being overcharged that I may not realize it? So one effective way to lure the reader is to relate to the reader, either by asking a question or proposing something that the reader may have experienced in his or her life. So another very important thing to do in the introductory paragraph is to get to the point. In introductory paragraphs, some introductory sentences, like we just saw, are necessary to kind of set up your article, but sometimes people get so wrapped up in the introduction that you totally lose the reader because after sentences, the reader still doesn't know what this article is about. So you do eventually want to get to the point in that introductory paragraph, and you want to do it relatively quickly so that the reader knows what you are going to say. And I think, one thing is that I've always been taught is to respect the reader's time, right? People reading our magazine, they maybe don't have all day to read the magazine. Get to the point quickly, and let them know what they're going to be reading about. You also want to make sure that you clearly state your thesis. We talked about this before, but in that paragraph, you want to make sure that your thesis is clearly stated and that it's not vague and that it's not wishy-washy and that you give your perspective or you present your point very clearly and concisely. Once you've lured the reader, if you can manage to lure the reader in the introductory paragraph, then all you need to do is keep the reader engaged. So you've kind of gotten over the big hurdle of making the person read on, right? So if you've established that in your introductory paragraph, then you just have to keep the reader engaged. And by following, I think, a couple easy steps, this can be manageable when writing an article. So be concise. Don't be too wordy. Again, respect a reader's time. If you can make a point in one sentence, make it in 1. Don't make it in 4. Or if you can use 5 words instead of 10, use 5. So I think there's definitely a benefit to using flowery language sometimes, but sometimes we get so kind of mulled down in flowery language that there's just a bunch of words and readers have to sift through them to get the point of a sentence. So be concise. You want to vary your sentence structure. So, use different sentence structures. It doesn't always have to be subject, verb, predicate. So you can use passive voice, active voice. So vary up your sentence structure so that not all of your sentences tend to read the same way. You want to make sure that your paragraphs are organized with logical segues. So making sure that you don't have one paragraph end and then another one begin with a totally different thought. Readers can often be lost if that happens. So they can think, well, wait, we were just talking about this, and now all of a sudden in this next paragraph I'm talking about this. So you want to make sure that your paragraphs have kind of logical transitions so that the article flows nicely and the reader is carried from one paragraph to the next. Much like when we're reading a novel or reading a newspaper article, we like to have that flow to continue from paragraph to paragraph. We've talked about this before, but maintaining a tone throughout your article. So whether it be whimsical or serious or informative, you want to kind of maintain that tone because it can be distracting to a reader when the tone changes throughout the article. It can come off as a little bit choppy. So maintaining a tone is important. Avoiding distractions. So, all of the articles that are submitted to the property professional go through a few rounds of proofreading by the editorial team. So we hopefully will catch any typos, but that's just a really kind of an easy win for article writing. Just make sure that you don't have typos or that you don't have any kind of grammatical non-agreement, because that can be something that's a little bit distracting for the reader, and it can cause you to lose your reader, which you don't want to do if you spent all this time writing an article. Avoiding repetition. Once you've said something once, that's good. You don't have to keep saying it 5 different ways, and this next slide kind of keeps to this. So a lot of people, I think, they want to get a point across so badly that they end up making the point 5 times in different ways. Once is good, because if you do it effective and concisely once, your reader should get it. So these sentences here is an example of repetition. A fixed active RFID solution is a wise investment for highly sensitive items that require around-the-clock monitoring. This type of solution will ensure that highly sensitive items that need continuous tracking are monitored at all times. So those 2 sentences virtually say the exact same thing. Is it wrong? Is one of them incorrect? Absolutely not. But I just said in 2 sentences what I easily could have said in 1. So this is sometimes more of an editorial activity once you've written your article, is to go through it and say, okay, have I used too many words or too many sentences to get across a point that I could have just used 1 sentence for? And I think that's one of the benefits of proofreading and editing, is you can sometimes pare down your article to pack a lot more punch without saying things too many times. So another key, I think, key thing to do in keeping the reader engaged is to be concise. So just like we talked about not repeating ideas in different ways, don't use too many words when fewer words will do the trick. So in the first example here, we have a few extra words that are highlighted. And then in the second example, we kind of have the same thought that's presented with fewer words. So in the first one, we all know that over the past decade, there's been an extremely large and notable increase in the overall number as well as types of RFID solutions offered to organizations. So we can kind of pare that down and trim off the fat of that sentence and make it a little bit more readable and convey the same information. So over the past decade, a wide variety of RFID solutions have become available due to advancements in technology. Much cleaner, much more concise. We dropped the "we all know that," and we dropped kind of some of the flowery adjectives that don't necessarily do much for this sentence. There's certainly a place for flowery adjectives and qualifiers, but if there are sentences that you see that just have a few too many words for the sake of using words, try cutting them out and reading the sentence and seeing if it just comes across in a bit more of an effective manner. So once you've kind of got your introductory paragraph, you've got your luring statements, you've organized your body paragraphs and your supporting statements, whether it be research or personal experience or telling a story. The conclusion of your piece is also very important. You don't want to spend all this time writing a great introduction and a great article and then have it just fall apart in the conclusion, because the conclusion is what you leave the reader with, right? So if you go to see a movie and the first hour and 45 minutes of the movie were fantastic and the last 15 minutes were absolutely dreadful, you're probably going to walk away from that movie thinking that you didn't really like it and that it wasn't very good. Same thing with a meal. If you have a 3-course meal and the first 2 were phenomenal and the last was atrocious, you might walk away from that meal thinking that it was pretty bad. Your conclusion is the same thing. Don't let it just fall apart at the conclusion because you want to wrap it up quickly. The conclusion is just as important a part of the article as is the introduction and the body of the article. So in the conclusion, you don't just want to sum it all up again. You don't just want to iterate what you've just said in the article because people have already read that. They know what you said. The conclusion should be something different. But it doesn't have to follow kind of a prescribed formula. A conclusion can do many things. So a conclusion could assert the article's findings. So if you're, drawing a conclusion from the findings that you have presented in the article, you can do that in the conclusion. A lot of good conclusions will either propose some next steps for the reader. So, if you found this article beneficial or effective, here are some things that you can do in order to, find the best RFID solution, or, think about how you can, organize your asset management reports to inform some business decisions. So proposing next steps for the reader, what they can take away from the article and then take into their profession, is an effective conclusion. Maybe you want to predict some events to come based on your thesis, right? Maybe you want to use your article and your research and what you've put forth as kind of a basis of saying, here's where I think this trend is going, or here's what I think we might be able to see in the coming years. It's not that you're trying to predict the future, or not that we think that you're clairvoyant, but perhaps you have some interesting suggestions to give people some food for thought to take away. Maybe you want to explain why this article needed to be written, why you were interested in this topic. You can provide some questions for further thought and research, more of a challenge to the reader to ask them some questions to kind of get their wheels turning if they want to kind of, pursue more research on the topic. The other thing is that conclusions can be included at the beginning of the article. So I read some very good articles that kind of put their conclusion at the beginning, and then they go on to support that conclusion. So you can always kind of, put your concluding thoughts at more towards the beginning of the article, and then use your article to kind of support that conclusion. I set out to find out an answer to this, and here's what my conclusion was. Now I'm going to tell you what I did to come to that conclusion. So they can also be included at the beginning of the article. So one of the other most important pieces of an article, I don't want to put too much weight on any one aspect because I think that all of these elements are equally weighted when you're writing an article, and you should try to make them all very strong. So you can have a great article, great conclusion, and a bad title, and again, people won't want to read it. Because what do we look at when we determine whether we want to read something? It's the headline in the newspaper, it's the title of an article, it's the title of a movie, it's the title on the book. And, people like to say you can't judge a book by its cover, but oftentimes this is what things are judged by. So you want to have a title that is something, again, that's going to lure the reader into wanting to read on and to read your article. So here in example A, let's say that you're writing an article about change management. So your title here, change management is necessary in all organizations. And your opening sentence is something like, change management is a necessary function in all organizations to effect smooth procedural transitions. Again, that's true. It's a fact. There's nothing grammatically wrong with that title of that opening sentence, but it's dreadfully boring, and I'm not sure that I would really want to read an article entitled that unless I was told that I had to. It doesn't really draw me in. The next example, though, certainly does. So change, it's happening, like it or not. And the opening sentence is a little bit different. People don't like change, organizations like it even less. So how can we as property managers affect change and get our colleagues on board? So that's just, we're not really saying anything different. We still know that this article is about change management, but this title and opening sentence makes it a little bit more personal for the reader. We all know we don't like change. We all know it's difficult. We've all been there. You're kind of sympathizing with the reader. Let's talk about some ways where this can be made a little bit more manageable, rather than just stating a fact, change management is necessary, you know, here are some steps on how you can ease the transition. So on the average, an interesting statistic, 5 times as many people read the headline as read the body copy. Okay, so headlines are very important. Titles are very important. So you want to make sure that it relates to your topic. Now, we can go out there and pick a title that's very, very exciting, but it has to relate to the topic of the article, right? We can't just kind of dupe the reader into thinking that they're going to read about something and then have them reading about something else. So that's not what we want to be doing. We want to title it something that relates to the topic. Again, even in the title, less is more. Don't use more words when fewer will do the trick, and make it catchy. You know, we don't want to overdo cliches when we're writing articles. You know, we don't want to, you know, kind of fall too far into that trap. But you can use a cliche every now and again. You can use it in your title if it's something that you feel is going to draw the reader in. You should be open to using things like that. And, you know, one thing about writing for the property professional is while we do have kind of guidelines and we do have a style sheet and we ask that, you know, those are adhered to, it's pretty wide open with respect to the topics that you want to write on and the way that you want to present your article. So there's not really going to be a time when someone says, you know, this really isn't the type of article that we want to publish. That may happen, but you know, we really do invite a wide variety of articles and styles and give you kind of the latitude to kind of speak in your voice. So there's just a couple of helpful links here that I go back to time and again when I'm writing something. There's a link here that will help you with some kind of catchy headlines. So kind of some tips on writing catchy headlines, and then writing catchy articles, so 11 simple tips. So it just kind of breaks it down into think about doing these things when you're writing an article, and it may just make it so much easier for you. Just kind of very useful, manageable, consumable tips for article writing. So I did just want to share with you for the property professional specifically some article submission dates. So we have our issues here for 2016 and our article submission dates. Obviously after articles are submitted, we need to have them well in advance of the publication of the issues so that we can go through editorial review. So on the next slide, we're going to have some information about the editorial team. So I would urge you that even if you know that you want to write an article and you feel pretty ready to write an article, please utilize the editorial team. Any one of the regional editors, myself or Billy Joe or Doug, we are more than happy to help you through this process. And you don't have to come to us with an article already written. Come to us with an idea. I'm thinking about writing about this topic. Can we kind of throw some ideas around and see what might be an effective way to do it? We are more than happy to help kind of from the beginning stage, and it doesn't have to be that you come to us with an article that you just ask us to edit. We would be happy to kind of collaborate with you if you have some ideas. So Jessica, I believe, is going to share this PowerPoint with you after the webinar. So we have there the contact information for the editors. And again, you know, you can contact your regional editor, or you can contact any one of the editors on this slide if you would like some just some assistance, or you know, have any questions just about the article submission process for the property professional. And that is all that I have. Hopefully there were some questions that we can address now. Hopefully everyone found that somewhat helpful, but I would be welcome to answering any questions or having any kind of discussion amongst the group at this point.
Thanks, Betsy. I do have a question. And then just a reminder, if you have a question, you just use the raise hand button next to your name, or you can type it in. But the first question I have is, you mentioned that there was a style sheet that kind of provides guidance on how your article should look. Where would we go to get that information?
Yep, that is on the NPMA website. If you go to, I have the address in the PowerPoint. It's where you can also see the past issues of the Property Professional. It's on the NPMA website under Tools, Publications, Property Professional.
Thank you.
Under that same link is going to be some information generally about the Property Professional as well as archived issues.
Great. So I think that answers the next question that I had, which is, can we take a look at old magazines to see some of the past articles? And you just mentioned, obviously, that there are archived issues of the magazine on the NPMA website. So yes, that's really good information. And let's see, we have another question here. Are these slides available as a guide to use? So I can answer that question. I'll send the slides out to everyone later this afternoon, so everyone will have a copy of the slides from today. And let's see, the next question I have, Betsy, is there a recommended process for who to send your articles to first? Does it matter if you go to your region first or to you or Billy Joe? Is there a recommended process to follow?
There really isn't a recommended process. I think that most folks end up sending the articles to their regional editor first. I think it kind of also depends on whether or not you're kind of looking for some assistance with the article. So if you are looking for assistance, I think probably your regional editor. I am always happy to help with anyone who's interested in writing an article. So there really is not a recommended kind of path for submission. It eventually is going to get submitted to Billy Joe, who kind of maintains the queue of articles.
Great. I am going to unmute Christopher. 1 second here. Oh, let me try that again. Okay, Christopher, do you have a question?
Yeah, I see that Barbara Bays is the central region. I wonder if that's the region that New Mexico falls in, do you know?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that question. Is that the region?
You think Barbara Bays is over all of New Mexico?
I would imagine, but I don't want to speak. I'm not sure what chapters would fall within the central region. That it would seem to me that would be the case. Jessica, are you aware?
I think that's central region. I can't think off the top of my head.
You can just email me what you find, I guess. That was it. That's all the question I had.
Okay, great. We do have a couple more questions typed in here. So the first one, Betsy, is, I wrote a rather long paper for my senior thesis on the history of government contracting in support of the warfighter. Would something like that be suitable for the magazine?
Absolutely. I think that sounds like a fantastic topic. It kind of takes what we do and applies it to kind of an arena that we're not necessarily all familiar with. So I think that that's kind of the perfect type of article. And I should mention that we also, if there are articles that you have submitted to other publications, or if there are things that you have written for another purpose, these articles don't necessarily have to be, a uniquely written article for the Property Professional. We have published things in the Property Professional that have been published previously. So if you have something like that, it could absolutely be something that we could include in the Property Professional.
Great. Okay, I have another question here. Is there a general time frame to submit an article? So I guess like right up to the deadline, or do you have a preference on the time frame?
Yes, so I these are the submission deadline, which means, so the submission deadline for the article is when the national editor, when Billy Joe has to have the article in hand to be considered for publication in that next issue. So obviously, if you are requesting some editorial assistance and you submit something on February 12th, it doesn't give anybody kind of a lot of time to do that. So it might be that if there are edits that need to be made, it might be held for another issue. So if you do want to have kind of an editorial review, or if you're looking for a little bit of assistance, then I would suggest that you submit the article in advance of the submission deadline so that it gives the editors a bit of time to look over it.
Very good. I think this question is for me. So the question is, will the presentation be available on our webpage? So we'll definitely have the presentation on our YouTube channel, and we'll also share that on Facebook, and probably a copy or a link to the recorded version in an upcoming news flash, probably next week, of the presentation. But I do think it's a great idea to actually put it on our website as well. So I'll look into getting a link to the recording on the Property Professional submission page, perhaps, of our website. I think that's a fantastic idea, so thank you for that. A couple more questions, Betsy. First question, what's the criteria for submitting pictures with the article?
So if there are images that you would like to include with your article, you are more than welcome to submit those with the article, and often people do that. Sometimes based on kind of the format and the layout, the folks who do kind of the graphic design and the layout may need to either replace the image or kind of shrink an image. But I would urge you that if there are images that you think kind of pertain well to your article, to submit those. And, you know, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be included. We also sometimes, if a lot of our articles are submitted without images, and we will select images that kind of, you know, complement the article nicely so that we have an image to accompany it.
Great. I have one more here in the queue. What do you think the minimum amount of words for an article should be?
So I am going to answer that question by not answering that question, because I think it should be whatever you think whatever is necessitated, right? So, I mean, you obviously aren't going to submit an article with 50 words. So I think it can be as short, though, as the writer feels like it needs to be to get a point across. You know, we do have mini articles that are just a couple of paragraphs. So, you know, it can be short. I think we would just ask that even if it is a short article, that it be kind of a short article that isn't short because there's not been adequate research done, or maybe it's just a topic that only merits a few paragraphs. So I don't really like to put limits on either end, because I think that the writer of the article should really determine, based on what he or she is trying to get across, what the length of the article should be.
Yeah, and to piggyback off that, the mini articles that Betsy mentioned, in the issue of the magazine that's getting ready to hit the mail, you'll notice that there are a number of shorter articles that we're kind of kicking off this year, just to kind of show we're doing all lengths of articles. So, you know, a smaller article may be more of kind of a quick news tidbit as opposed to, you know, new thought-provoking information. But you'll be able to see that in the next issue of the magazine once it lands in your mailbox. Okay, I do not have any other questions in the queue. So if anyone has any questions as a follow-up after this webinar is ended, feel free to email those over and we'll make sure we get your questions answered.